Does there need to be a push from Khalistani supporters to disassociate the movement with previous militancy? Again, does there need to be a push from Khalistani supporters to disassociate the movement with previous militancy? And I'll bring up some statistics in regards to this question being proposed to media professionals. But if you could hear from Shamsher Singh first on this topic.
I think if we look at this, the question of militancy, I think it goes back to the idea that as Sikhs we're this barbaric other, when the coordinates for this conversation are Europe and modernity, and when we look back towards like militancy, it's barbaric violence that exists outside of the scope of like what's legitimate. I think it's not on myself as a Khalistani. I wasn't born during the militancy. I was a child during that period. I don't see why I have a responsibility to distance myself from something that I wasn't around at, and I think it's an unfair expectation. And regarding on the question that's always kind of asked by the media, is it justifiable for Sikhs to pick up arms? They always ask this question. It's, they want like that kind of provocative kind of response to it, that yeah, we can pick up weapons and the rest of it. It's something that the Khalsa Panth has done since its inception to be Shastartari. Since 1986, the Gurmate that were passed for the liberation of the Qawm, Sikhs believe in being Shastartari. Formal declarations were passed in 1986 for the Khalistan movement to pick up arms and to pursue as a Shastartari people. We're not pacifists, so the context of that. So yes, it's perfectly okay for Sikhs to pick up arms, to pursue their freedom. But there are preconditions to this armed resistance. We're not irrational, erratic people, right? There's preconditions, and those are the arena for the Khalsa Panth as a sovereign entity to deliberate upon. So distancing ourselves, it hasn't really kind of worked in the past. If we look at the reports that were written during the 80s of state violence and state terror, like oppression in Punjab, that was written by a panel of judges which were arrested for sedition.
Can I add in one stat which just might help you kind of go further on that? 20% of those that answered our questionnaire said that they felt Khalistan cannot be separated from incidents such as the Air India bombing of 1985. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Because you're saying that you feel you do not need to disassociate yourself with that movement, but 20% of the media we spoke with felt that it can't be separated.
I think like it's impossible to disassociate yourself from militancy when you don't have militancy. Like I live in Southall, I don't have like a militant faction of Khalistanis running around in Punjab. So I think it's really impossible to do that. But not much has changed. Like when the 80s, when reports were written, right, this was when the state violence and state terror was taking place, 86 to 95, oppression in Punjab, who are the guilty, Citizens Report for Democracy, and these were liberal progressive groups, right, in a modern secular India, and they still called the Sikhs during that time terrorists, militants and extremists. And the oppression in Punjab is one of the best reports that's written about state violence and terror, and they document cases of mass rape, they document cases of government terror. They actually call the governments terrorists, and they say, there's one quote in there that says Amritaris are being specifically targeted, particularly Sikh men, and Amritaris are in danger, their future is uncertain. And it goes into the details of why we were being targeted. But even during the 80s, during that time, there was still this, that the Sikhs are terrorists. So no matter how hard we try, no matter how hard we say our Siddhant is Guru Granth Sahib, that's where we draw our inspiration from. So the question separating yourself from militancy is a loaded question. No matter how hard we try and say we're going to follow the Siddhant of Guru Granth Sahib, when Khalistan is established, it's going to be governed on the basis of the Siddhant, the teachings of Guru Granth Sahib, and the media is going to call us a theocracy. They're going to say, well, you need to disassociate yourself from religious violence and extremism. So I think the onus is, and again, I don't want to get into some of the points that Amardeep is raising are brilliant. I don't want to get into this us versus them with the media, but like Amardeep also says, there is an agenda by governments, and for us, how do we kind of draw the boundaries and say, well, we're not associated with militancy, but at the same time, we're a people that are armed and that do believe. Like this government, like democracy, if it was the be-all and end-all, Britain wouldn't have one of the most advanced militaries in the world. They wouldn't be selling weapons to Saudi Arabia so they can bomb children. So the idea that we somehow, when we're talking about our freedom, it has to be non-violent, It has to be rational, reasonable rhetoric that exists in the public sphere. Like, why are these conditions opposed upon us? We don't say to the British government, when you're going to talk about democracy, you should disarm yourselves nuclearly. We shouldn't have nuclear weapons in the world. That the British government should disband its military before they talk about democracy in the world. That the American government, which is one of the most imperialistic governments in the world, they should disband their military before they go and talk about to the rest of the world that we live in a democratic country. And India as well, as the world's kind of so-called largest democracy, has the 4th largest army. Kashmir is one of the largest heavily militarized areas in the world. They commit mass human rights violations and atrocities, yet no one says to them that you should disband your army before calling yourself a democratic nation. So I think it's a loaded question. I think it pushes us again into that sphere of when we're a religion, when we have our Quran and it's a ceremonial sword, then it's fine. But as soon as you step into the realm of politics and you talk about arming yourself for liberation, then you're religious extremists. So that religious secular binary doesn't exist for us, because it's miri piri. Our dharam goes into the public sphere, our public sphere goes into our private sphere. We're not these, dharam isn't just something that's private for us. So
let me bring that question to Dr. Jasjit Singh. In your own research, of course, did you feel that there was underlying concern that Khalistani support could kind of take the shape of something which it did in the 80s and the 90s?
I mean, so as part of the research, I mapped all the incidents that had involved Sikhs going back to the colonial period, and certainly post Operation Blue Star, there were incidents of violence in Britain. There were, plots to assassinate Indian state officials. There were lots of intra-Sikh issues. And I suppose the point I make is that, I work in a religious studies department, and if you think about it in terms of the trauma that still exists in the community, which we've talked about, and the fact that, because I'm often asked, could this ever happen again? Could the Sikhs start committing violence against each other to that degree that happened straight after Blue Star? And I thought, and the way I answer that, I say, how many occasions or instances do you know where a state attacks the most holiest shrine, using the religious terminology,
so I just like
of a community? Hang on, wait. And the only one I can think of that I've asked my colleagues is the destruction of the Jewish temple by the Roman Empire in 70 AD,
wow.
Which is something that the Jewish community still talks about, and it's something by which they still define themselves with. So in terms of attacks on the Brasa, I think there have been six or seven in total, but this was the one that was televised, revolution televised, so this is the one that kind of sticks in the memory. So what I say in terms of return to militancy is you have to understand the reason why that trauma occurred specifically after that event, and it would take an event of equal ferocity, I think, for that to happen again.
So again, it would take an event of equal ferocity for that to happen again. And two stats again from our questionnaire: 53% of those that responded to our questionnaire said they could maybe see an attack happening in the West from Khalistani supporters. 53%. So that is their own perception of kind of where the Khalistani movement lies. Jasmine, how do you respond to that thought that 53% of the journalists we spoke to believe that there is a danger? Somebody like yourself, who self-admittedly is a Khalistani, could propose and be a danger, a threat to general society.
I'm not sure how to answer that. Could I be a threat to danger because I don't fit the traditional image of a Khalistani, and maybe I could go out there and unashamedly represent who I am and where I come from, what I believe in? Is that why I could be a perceived threat?
It was actually a specific question on do you believe there could be a terror attack in the West from a Khalistani supporter? And again, 53% answered maybe.
That makes sense to me.
Let's read this out.
That makes sense to me, because Khalistanis are seen as, Khalistan and terrorism is synonymous within the media. So that does make sense from the kind of media's point of view.
It's relevant that we understand how many people responded, though, right?
Okay.
53%.
Yeah, exactly. Like we did say at the start, it was a very small sample. Do me a favour, don't shout out again. We'll pass the mic around. Sorry, Vijay, you were going to come in.
I'm just going to say, I've concluded that there is no threat to the British state because of what I said before about the ferocity of the event. And despite the the January 2014 revelations about possible British involvement in the lead up to Operation Blue Star. There's been nothing. There's been no protest against the British government as a consequence. There's been no, anything against the British state per se. So I would challenge that argument, to be honest.
And kind of like as organisations that exist within our community that claim to be representative of Sikhs, they want to get further and closer to the establishment, to like whiteness, to the government. There's this whole push from Sikh organisations to be as part of the establishment. They're credentialised, they accept honours like OBEs, MBEs, Orders of the British Empire. So there's this kind of complete erasure of the colonial context that that allowed us to be here, and like modernity is kind of the precondition. Europe is the coordinates for any conversation to take place, and like it kind of be summed up by this attitude: I am here, and therefore we have arrived as a people. And there's no question of how did we arrive, what's the context of our arrival here. So I think Sikh organisations that represent us, they actually emulate whiteness and they want to be closer to the state. So I don't think that there's a threat, because as a community we pride ourselves on our integration, on our multiculturalism, on how good we are as British Sikhs, right? The whole idea of the good Sikh is someone who is an MP now, as someone who is a lawyer, someone who's credentialised like by modernity and whiteness. So I think as a community there's no threat.
I think the only threat that Shamsher poses is threat by philosophy, even that destroys through philosophical concepts, yeah? And there's a genuine threat that we lose the argument by always
talking about not being academic or theoretical. Should I write for
we're talking about the media here. Okay. We're talking about the media and about how we put our case across, yeah? But the point about militancy, I mean, it's a loaded term, isn't it? The Indian government isn't militant, although they commit all kinds of genocide. So, and one person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist. And as long as we're part of a subaltern, sorry, I'm slipping to Shamsher talk. As long as we're part of a group that's been oppressed, then we will always be fighting against the kind of construction of our resistance. But our Sikhi is very clear, we have defensive Sangharsh, we've always had that. We won't be Sikhs if we said that we will become pacifists. So no, we are, and when you asked that question on Nihal's show, I think that you should have answered, you didn't answer the question, but you should have said, yes, we believe in self-defense. If somebody's going to kill me, then I have a human right to stand and fight, and we didn't. I speak not as somebody who's a commentator, I speak as somebody who actually was in Punjab in 1984 with Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwala. So I knew the kinds of, and those people were not the kind of rabid Taliban types that they're coming. They were very gentle people, and they believed in the idea of the Anandpur Matan. One thing that's been lost in all of this debate today, and I want to bring us back to that debate, is that 84 was about the Anandpur Matan. The Khalistan issue comes afterwards, and conveniently we've lost that, and that was about reconstructing that colonial state or moving that colonial state to become a new kind of state, yeah? And we've lost that, and that was the biggest threat, I think, to that state. And convenient that's been. So I think that to some extent it's convenient for the Indian state to keep reproducing the narrative of Khalistan as a kind of militant separatist threat. I'm not saying that we should take their construction, we can reconstruct it for ourselves, but we also need to understand the politics that's being played here as well.
Just very briefly on that, I just want to make
before we go to Amardeep Bassey,
I just want to make a point on that. Sant Jarnail Singh, as Dr Gurnam Singh was speaking about, Sant Jarnail Singh mobilised the Sikh community through shifting their focus back towards Gurmat, through Prachar, through Sikhi, through being Shastatari, in order to assert our sovereignty and our resistance in the struggle to exercise our Padshahi. So not just being defensive, Khalsa Soe Malesh Se Jare, where Shastatari as a Qawm, we reserve the right as a sovereign people, like Britain reserves the right as a sovereign nation to attack or to defend as so it sees fit, as serves it as a sovereign nation. So as Sikhs, we should have that same mentality that we have the ability to attack or defend as it serves us. And that has been demonstrated from Guru Har Govind's time, when they donned two Karwana of Miri Piri, when they provoked the Mughal Empire into open warfare, when they captured the Baj, the stories that we tell ourselves as children, the Sakhiyan that are told within the Sikh community. So there's both sides of that. Miri and Miri, we exert our sovereignty.
Let's go to Amardeep Bassey if it's
Jasjit in his report made a very interesting observation. that for the British, when it's convenient for them, they will construct us as a military race. And when it's not convenient, they'll construct us as a terrorist people. So we need to know how these kind of hegemon, how these kind of dominant kind of groups do mobilise their own kind of ideas about the other, if you like.
So, Amardeep Bassey, in your opinion, as a media professional, as a journalist, does there need to be a push from Khalistani supporters to disassociate the movement with previous militancy?
I think the edge needs to be taken off it a little. Maybe the aggression might be taken off it, but like Shamsher was saying, we'd be doing Sikhism a disservice to say we have no militant edge. I mean, surely wasn't the whole Khalistan movement born out of violence? Wasn't Operation Blue Star violent? Wasn't the resistance violent?
Just a caveat, Dr Gurnam Singh there mentioned, I believe, the Anandpur Sahib resolution, which is something that perhaps I think more people should kind of look into in regards to where these movements started from in the modern context. But sorry, if you'd like to continue.
So I think there's a danger that you can go too far the other way and try and portray Sikhism as being this pacifist religion, which it isn't. In fact, one of the USPs of Sikhism, certainly to the West, is this military nature, this saint soldier. We are the epitome of a saint soldier. We need to play that up. So I wouldn't say that there needs to be a push from Khalistani supporters to disassociate from militancy or fundamentalism. There's no crime in being a fundamentalist. Sikhs, or certainly some Sikhs, Amritdhari Sikhs, by pure definition, are fundamental Sikhs. It's not a dirty word.
Just in your opinion then, as a young Sikh and as a Khalistani, do you think the media will ever actually understand that notion if it is portrayed in such fashion as kind of Sikhs will be proud to have that kind of inner militant philosophy? Do you think media will ever kind of understand that when it's related to modern politics in regards to things like Khalistan?
In regards to modern politics, I think Western-centric and Eurocentric media will never understand it because they are coming from a perspective of living under a liberal democracy, and our version of Sikhi and politics are synonymous. You can't divide the two. Guru Nanak's my throat is quite sore. Guru Nanak's politics are revolutionary and pure. He separated dirty politics from his incredible revolutionary path, and I think people from the West and Western media and stuff like that, they can't understand that because we, as a Sikh nation, we do not subscribe to democracy. Democracy is completely opposite to what our gurus would have wanted and the guru styles of politics and Khalistan essentially. So as a whole, no, I don't think they would ever understand. They need to step out of the Westphalian model of politics and away from this liberal democracy and away from liberalism as a whole to try and understand our version of politics.
Let's take some comments from the audience. Did you want to say something, Viv? Just with the mic. So.
Sorry, I just wanted to understand the context in terms of the stats.
Yeah, okay. Well, we did say at the start, I'm not sure if you were here, that it's a very small sample because we just didn't get a response. We sent it to approximately 200 different media outlets or individuals and got a very small response. And we haven't said this is 53% of the media feel this way. We've said 53% of those that responded to us have said this. But we'll be more specific because we were still sending out that questionnaire as of like an hour ago. And the last time I looked at stats was about 15 minutes before this event. So we'll put them all online. And again, it is a very small sample, self-admittedly. Any more comments, sorry?
Yes. I think the most salient point tonight is this dichotomy with what Dr Gurnam said about the Anandpur Sahib resolution and what Amardeep and Shamsher said, sort of diverging from that. If you take the Khalistan movement before Operation Blue Star, it was all about the Anandpur Sahib resolution, about civil rights, economic rights, about free banks and not having government banks, about investments, water rights, and things like that. This is what Sant Janil Singh campaigned for, and this is what he wanted. The Khalistan movement came after that, after Operation Blue Star. And we've forgotten about the Anandpur resolution, and now we frame Khalistan as a romantic notion of we want our own country because everybody else got their own country. This is not historically accurate. What Sant Janil Singh wanted was those rights. for Punjab to be liberated from that corruption, from those lack of rights. So, you know, we can't disassociate ourselves from the militancy, but we've got to frame the Khalistan in those terms, into a political movement, which is what it was.
Jasmine Kaur.
Yeah, I 100% agree with your statement there. When we talk about the Khalistan movement in today's day and age, and in the diaspora now, it's always spoken about as an independence movement and stuff like that, but we forget the historical context behind it. We need to look all the way back to 1947, when India came into inception as a so-called as one of the world's so-called biggest democracies, and we need to look back at how Sikhs have faced so much degradation and had their basic civil rights never acknowledged and never given to them. And we need to look back at things like the water politics in Punjab, and the Anandpur Sahib resolution is so important. And Sant Ji said himself, it's a direct quote from him, obviously I'm saying it in English, he was neither for, neither against Khalistan, but the foundations for Khalistan were laid when the Indian government, when Indian armed security forces invaded the Darbar Sahib with tanks and ammunition and stuff like that.
Do you have any more comments from the audience? Please raise your hand, or we'll share one more comment, then we're going to the next question.
I just want to say on the Anandpur Sahib resolution, there's a recent article where National Sikh Youth Federation is featured in the Caravan magazine by a guy called Daniel Block about Jagmeet, and he talks about the Anandpur Sahib resolution, and then he put up an interesting fact that the Indian government, when the Anandpur Sahib resolution was drafted, their official position was they're never going to accept these demands, and it was demonstrated through the Sikhs' political response in the Dharmyudh Morcha, which can be translated as the Sikh Civil Rights Movement, was launched in May 1982. 30,000 Sikhs courted arrest, and in October 60,000 Sikhs courted arrest. In February 1984, there was firing in Panipat where Sikh men were attacked, their beards were shaven. There was state-organized mob violence against peaceful Sikh protesters. So the Anandpur Sahib resolution fell on the wayside. The Dharmyudh Morcha took center stage. As a peaceful agitation, the state used mass arrest, genocidal violence in order to suppress Sikh dissent, and in order, like the Guardian says, to forge this psychological wedge between Sikhs and Hindus and turn it into a communal issue. When it was about political issues, the Anandpur Sahib resolution is no longer relevant because the Khalistan constitution supersedes that. 1986 Sabat Khalsa, Khalistan is the Qawmi agenda, the national objective of the Sikh Panth. That's something we're going to strive for, because the Anandpur Sahib resolution demands are never going to be met by the Indian government. And remember, the response to the Anandpur Sahib resolution demand, to the peaceful movement that was from 1947 onwards, right? 1984 didn't just happen out of nowhere. The response of the government to Sikh political agitations, peaceful protests, were mass arrests, with genocidal violence, was the attack on Darbar Sahib, was Operation Woodrose from 84 to 95, where over 1 million Sikhs were killed through state terror. So the response to from the government has been terror and incredible genocidal violence, and yet we're told that we're meant to speak about Khalistan without anger or without passion, and we need to go back to a document that tens of thousands of people have courted arrest for. It's moved on. We're talking about open warfare of the Sikhs engaging in military operations against the Indian government. The position of Khalistanis is that East Punjab is occupied territory by the Indian government. Open warfare. So the Anandpur Sahib resolution is completely out of date. It's outdated, and the new Khalistan documents need to be formed. New Khalistan positions need to be and are being formed by Sikh academics and intellectuals.